spiritual food for thought. Welcome back to Spiritual Food for Thought. I thank you for joining me once again. Since I've started this channel, we've put up a decent amount of videos, and the most popular one of all time is one about how we keep the Sabbath, and it's talking about cooking on the Sabbath. Now, I do not cook on the Sabbath. My family does not cook on the Sabbath, and we don't believe that we should because of things revealed in Scripture. And on that most popular video about cooking on the Sabbath, you of course have a lot of people who just don't want anything to do with the Sabbath, even though it's one of the 10 Commandments, even though God tells us to remember it, and they come in just with all sorts of stuff about how terrible the Sabbath is, how you're going to try to work to earn your salvation by not working, and there's all sorts of stuff that doesn't make sense. I've got an entire playlist on the Sabbath for those of you guys who are really curious. But then you also have a bunch who come in and say, you know, in essence, this is ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense. Don't make it so hard to obey God. And I'm like, actually obeying God is not too hard for us. And why we don't cook on the Sabbath is that God defines work. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to look 3 little places in Scripture, and I'm going to show you as clearly as I possibly can. If you actually care, if you're actually concerned, follow along. And if somewhere along the line there's an error in my reasoning, please point it out. But all I'm doing is looking at passages of Scripture, allowing God to define what work is, because He says cooking's work. God specifically, point blank, 100% says that. And He says when we can cook, and He says when we can't. So I want to lay that as a foundation. And for those who have ears to hear, check this out. You can also just reject it. You know, nobody can force you to believe what you want. And even in Scripture, you know, people don't have to believe what it says or agree that that's how we should interpret that passage. So one of the sections I went to in the video about why we don't cook on the Sabbath comes from Exodus chapter 16. Now, Exodus chapter 16 is 4 chapters before Exodus 20, where we see the 10 Commandments. But in Exodus 16, He gives them manna. And there's even a ministry out there who says, you know, does Exodus 16:23 prohibit cooking on the Sabbath? And it reads, "And he saith unto them, This is that which Yahweh hath said." So Moses is speaking. He saith unto them, "This is that which Yahweh hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yahweh. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept unto the morning." So a way to interpret that is, they gathered everything, they cooked everything, and they saved half for the next day. Some of it they seethed, or they may have baked it, but they did that today, and then they laid up the rest for the next day. And some people say, no, they were only baking what they were going to eat that day, and then the rest they would bake the next day. Now, of course, it never says that. But if you're going to isolate a verse and go, does this verse teach that? It's plenty easy to say, nope, that verse doesn't teach it. And all you got to do is pick verses that don't teach whatever you don't want to believe. But in context, Exodus 16 comes after Exodus 12. We'll get to that. But it also, 16:23 comes after 16:5. So I'm going to back up to 16:4. "Then said Yahweh unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them, whether they will walk in my law or no." Yes, the law already existed. Continues. Verse 5. "And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in." So to prepare, that's what we do when we prep a ration of food, preparation day. It can also be to fix. You ever fix a meal? So check this out. "It shall come to pass on the 6th day they shall prepare that," which I say is cooking. It's preparing or fixing the meal, baking or seething, as verse 23 talks about. "So they shall prepare that which they bring in on the 6th day, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." So every day, they're gathering, cooking, and eating. Gathering, cooking, and eating. On the 6th day, they gather twice as much, and what do they do with it? They prepare that which they bring in. When? On the 6th day, they shall prepare that which they bring in. Oh, is that just half of what they gather? And then the next day they prepare their other half? No. It shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So on the 6th day, you're cooking twice as much. Does Exodus 16:23 prove that? No. You have to back up to verse 5. And if you compare the two, you read everything in context, it should be very clear. And for those of you for whom it's not clear, I'm going to show something very interesting. We're going to go to Leviticus 23. If you guys know Leviticus 23, a lot of people say it's about the feasts, right? But the feasts aren't all feasts. It's about his appointed times. His moed, his moedim. But it starts off talking about the Sabbath. In verse 2, it says, speaking of the children of Israel and saying to them concerning the feast of the Lord, the moed, the appointed times, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest. A holy convocation, ye shall do no work therein. Okay? Keep that in mind. We're going to put the Sabbath on the list. It's on a list where it says no work. We're going to let God define work, but follow me along. You shall do no work therein. Now, if we skip forward, okay, verse 5 talks about the Passover, and after the Passover starts the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Verse 6, and on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto Yahweh. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread. In the first day ye shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. Okay, on the Sabbath it was no work. Here it's no servile work. That's going to be a type of work. We're going to let God define this. But, verse 8, ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh 7 days, and in the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. So we see he says on the weekly Sabbath you're going to do no work. No work at all. And we'll let God define that because I don't care what I think is work. I'm not God. This is not my law. Therefore, I don't care what you think is work. You're not God. I don't worship you. I'm not going to commit idolatry and exalt you higher than God. Okay? You're not God. I don't care what your definition is because I'm not God. I don't care what my definition is. We're going to let God define this. So the Sabbath is no work. The 1st and the 7th day of the week of unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, there's no servile work. Let's back up to Exodus 12, the first time we find out about this Feast of Unleavened Bread. Let's see what he says, and let's come back here and glean more from Leviticus 23. So in Exodus chapter 12, and I love just letting Scripture interpret Scripture because here's where his words are contained. Here's where he picked and chose. So, it talks about the Feast of Unleavened Bread in Exodus 12:15, and it continues in verse 16. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation. Oh yeah, we read that in Leviticus 23, right? There shall be a holy convocation. And in the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation. Yep, story checks out. No manner of work shall be done in them. No manner of work, huh? Save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. You know what he just said? He just said, cooking is work. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. Do you know what that means? Except the things that pertain to what you're going to eat. We're going to hold that thought. That only may be done of you. So he just said on the 1st and the 7th day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we have an opportunity. If we're going to obey him, we're going to do no work except that which pertains to what we eat. That's about cooking. Now, if the weekly Sabbath was a time that we were supposed to be cooking, it's not beyond God to say, no work must be done in that day, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. But he never says it about the weekly Sabbath. He does say this about these other days, which he refers to as a day for no servile work. So there's a difference between no work at all and no servile work. Because if you're doing no servile work, you may also cook. And we're going to find this out in a moment as we continue to look through what God says and compare it to just reality, to think about it for a moment. As we continue through the feasts listed, the appointed times of God in Leviticus 23, in verse 21, we're talking about Shavuot, or Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks. It says, and you shall proclaim on the selfsame day that it may be a holy convocation. Now we see the Sabbath's a holy convocation where you do no work. The first and the last day of unleavened bread are holy convocation where you do no servile work. This one, that it may be a holy convocation unto you, ye shall do no servile work therein. It may be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. So, what does servile work mean? I think it means the same thing here as it does when you talk about the first and the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You're not going to do any work, but you can cook. Some of the Moedim, some of the Moed, some of the appointed times of God are actual feast days. And then there's a different day, not a feast day, I'm going to talk to you about. Verse 24, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month on the 1st day of month, you shall have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Another appointed time, another holy convocation, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Yom Teruah, right? Ye shall do no servile work therein. Okay, now follow me on this one. 27, Leviticus 23. And on the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh, and you shall do no work. No work on the Day of Atonement. This is what people sometimes refer to as the fast. It's a day to afflict our souls. One way that we can afflict our souls is by fasting, abstaining from our physical. But if you have a day you're afflicting your soul, it's not a day you're going to be feasting. If you have a day where people commonly fast on it, it's not a day for eating. Therefore, no work except that which you're going to eat. Nope, doesn't say that here. And likewise, it doesn't say no servile work. It says no work, but not only does it say no work, let's continue. Ye shall do no work in that same day, for it's the day of atonement, to make atonement for you before Yahweh your God. For whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted on that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. And whatsoever soul it be that doeth any work on that same day. See, it doesn't say any work except that which every man should eat, right? Any work on that same day, the same soul shall I destroy among his people. Ye shall do no manner of work. This is very reminiscent of the weekly Sabbath, where there's no work to be done. I'm going to get to why I believe this is, but you shall do no manner of work therein. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings, and it will be a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month at even. From even unto even, ye shall celebrate your Sabbath, or observe your Sabbath, and afflict your souls, do no work at all. Then we have the final feast of the year, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. And in verse 35 it says, on the 1st day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. And on the 8th day shall be a holy convocation unto you, and ye shall make an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. It's a solemn assembly. You shall do no servile work therein. So let's think about this. The weekly Sabbath, he says no work at all. And in fact, we have an example in Exodus 16 where it says they were prepping everything the day ahead of time. They were baking or seething everything they gathered for the manna, and everything they gathered, which was twice as much on the 6th day, they prepared on the 6th day. I'm going to reread it just so people don't accuse me of, perverting what the scripture says or twisting what it says. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in. And it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So what they bring in, which is twice as much on the 6th day, they're going to prepare on the 6th day. And he said unto them, verse 23, this is that which Yahweh has spoken, or has said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yahweh. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will sieve, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. But it was already baked, it was already seethed, verse 5, it was already prepared or fixed. They already did that. Why? Because God says that cooking is work. God says that. When does he say that? Exodus 12:16. I'm just trying to put this in the forefront of your mind. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and in the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done. So the only type of work, according to God, that people were able to do was cooking. That which pertaineth to that which every man should eat. So then think about Leviticus 23. The weekly Sabbath, where no work at all should be done, and the Day of Atonement, where no work at all should be done, a day to afflict your souls when most people don't even eat. They consider it a day of fasting, and that's one of the ways they afflict their soul. No work at all. Then some of the appointed times that are actually feasts, like the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first and the seventh day, no servile work. The Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, no servile work. The Feast of Trumpets, no servile work. And the first and the eighth day of Tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, no servile work. The times of feasting, they were allowed to cook. I think Exodus 12:16 shows something about these holy convocations of the first and the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that then we can extrapolate that when later it starts off with saying no work at all except that which you're going to eat, only that can be done, and then later it says no servile work. So the difference between work and servile work for me, if we're only going to look at Scripture, is what he says in 12:16. Therefore, when he says no servile work for these other actual feast days, I say, this is a day not to work, except for cooking. Hope that makes sense. And if you think about atonement, part of the Day of Atonement is that he would make atonement for us. Okay? And what is part of the Sabbath? Well, if you back up to Exodus 31, verse 13, Yahweh's talking to Moses, and he says, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it's a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Yahweh that doth sanctify you. So what do we have here? We have a physical representation of a spiritual truth. Who sanctifies us? Yahweh does. Okay? So just like when people accuse me of trying to work to earn my salvation by obeying all 10 of the 10 commandments, but they don't accuse themselves of trying to work to earn their own salvation by obeying 9/10 of the 10 commandments, and that's, a problem, but I'm not going to work to earn something by not working, just like I'm not going to clean my room by not cleaning it. Okay? But he says his Sabbath is a reminder that it's not our works that sanctify us. It's him that sanctifies us. My Sabbath you shall keep. It's a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am Yahweh that doth sanctify you. This was his idea. He set the day apart. He tells us how to set it apart. He says don't do any work at all. He doesn't say don't do any work except that which every man must eat. He doesn't say that. He could have. He says it other places. He doesn't say it here. So I want to pretty much rest my case at this point. Words have meaning. In Scripture, God defines the words. How he uses things determines how we apply them and what we should think about them. Just like when he talks about food, he defines food. I don't care what you think is food. I don't care if you put cat on the menu. I don't have to believe it's food. God doesn't have to believe it's food. He defines the words in his book. So when he talks about work, I can make a pretty clear-cut case from my point of view that he considers cooking work. Exodus 12:16 will be what I submit. That's where he says it's work. And I can show you where he makes a distinction between legitimate feast days and appointed times, where he says no work on these appointed times, and on these feast days, no work except that which you could eat, except cooking. That's what I believe is in Scripture. If somehow, some way, that doesn't make sense to you, let me know. And if you've made it this far in the video, then you've watched it. But I don't care what anyone thinks, because I don't care what I think. What does he say? Ideally, we would sit at his feet, read the entire Bible, and then begin to form a thought about something. It's hard for us to do, but we need to know what he says. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to obey him, and we need to fear him and take him seriously. And we need to love him above all and take him seriously, or we're not going to obey him the way that he wants to be obeyed. Be blessed. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.